Hi everyone, my name is ATJ and today I'm going to be taking you through my Panda burn deck list that I used at the Dale100 GOAT Open. This was the first official GOAT format tournament that I've taken part in. There were 128 players and it was single elimination, so I was pretty happy to make it to round 5 and land myself a spot in the top 8. I was introduced to GOAT format about a year and a half ago in Cape Town, where we now actually have a growing GOAT format community, and ever since then I've just been grinding on Duelling book, where I managed to achieve, I think it was a personal best of about 54th on the ladder, which I know is not too impressive, but I think it was high enough for me to finally say that I should enter a tournament and see how I fared against a lot of these better players that have been playing since the format was originally around in 2005. Before I get into the deck list, I just want to say a huge thank you to Jinzo&Tonic, who helped me a lot with testing and theorizing the deck, just getting it ready for the tournament, and also to my local Cape Town GOAT format community for just encouraging me throughout the whole thing and telling me to keep going. So thanks to all of you guys, you know who you are. Okay, so moving on to the deck list and why I decided to play this strategy for the tournament. I've always considered myself a rogue player, and I tend to stray away from meta strategies in general. For me, a large part of the enjoyment that I get from this game comes from looking at what's popular and then really thinking, how can I beat this? So I spend a lot of time theory crafting and looking at all the interactions that are going on in the meta game and trying to gear my deck to best take advantage of that. So with that in mind, my journey with Burn really began when Chaos Turbo was the top dog, because despite the name, it's actually a seriously slow deck, which really suits the playstyle of Burn because it allows me time to gather my resources, take control of the game, and go for the game shot before they can. Recently, Warriors has really taken the top spot on the meta table, and this would normally not mean a good time for Burn because they have such strong removal and really high aggression, which is something that Burn historically struggles with. However, with the rise in popularity of Warriors, Solemn Judgment has also seen a huge increase in play, and as I'm sure you can imagine, a card that halves your opponent's life points from their own doing is obviously a huge plus for Burn because they're doing half the work for you. So I was thinking it would maybe be worth it to continue playing Burn for a bit longer and trying to see if I could rework my strategy to deal with all this aggression while taking the advantage of the increased play of Solemn Judgment. So with the backstory out of the way, let's get into the card by card, and then I will get a little bit deeper into my choices afterwards. So starting off with the monsters, we have 3 Nimble Momonga, 2 Giant Rat, 2 Panda, 1 Sangan, Cyberjar and Morphing Jar, followed by 1 Lava Golem, Tribe Infecting Virus, and finally Exiled Force. For the spells, we have the 1 Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity, also Premature Burial and Heavy Storm, then 2 Giant Trunade, 1 Swords of Revealing Light, and 2 Level Limit Area B. For the traps, we have 3 Threatening Roar, 1 Desert Sunlight, Mirror Force, Torrential Tribute, Ring of Destruction, Magic Cylinder, and Ceasefire. Then for your main burn traps, we have 3 Just Desserts, 3 Secret Barrel, and 3 Ojama Trio. For the side deck, we have 3 Death Wombat, 2 Cypher Soldier, 1 Injection Fairy Lily, 2 Scapegoat, 2 Mind Control, a Snatch Steal, MST, and the third giant Trunade, and finally we have 2 anti-spell fragrance. In this deck we're not using the fusion deck, so I just put all of the fusion monsters that have fire in them for good luck. Now, to get a little bit deeper into the deck, I'm first going to explain the basic strategy and what I was hoping to achieve, and then how the meta has influenced a few of my card picks. So the basic strategy with burn is really to just bide your time. You want to wait until a stage in the game where you have enough burn cards and your opponent has enough cards in their possession to fuel those burn cards so that you can do enough damage. Sometimes this can happen very early in the game, which is great, but most of the time it will happen a bit later. Most importantly is to understand the value of the 2 jars in the deck, because when these resolve, they basically fast forward the game 5 turns and let both players see 5 more cards and let you see a bunch of more burn cards. So very often resolving one of these 2 cards, especially on your turn, will 99% result with you winning the game. So with the basic strategy in mind and the knowledge that we're in a much more aggressive format, I think a lot of my card choices are immediately going to make a lot more sense. So obviously we're playing a lot of defensive cards. Firstly, on the monster side, it's basically the whole Earth package. I've sort of dialed it down on the aggressive side by only playing 2 Panda and 2 Rat, but 3 Nimble Momonga is really what stands out here. I think Nimble was a very underrated card. At best, it can block 3 attacks and gain you 3,000 life points, which is just going to keep you in the game for much longer. Rat is really versatile, being able to get you into the Nimble or into the Panda, which is obviously situationally really good, and even into Exiled if you need that spot removal. The bonus to using these monsters defensively is that although they're defensive cards, they still have a body, so even the Nimble Momonga can get in for 1 or 2,000 if your opponent doesn't summon a monster or have a battle trap or anything like that. And when you're playing a burn deck and you're expecting to do all of your damage through effect damage, being able to attack and get in damage like that just feels completely free and gets you to your win condition much sooner. On the spell side, we're just playing the 3 floodgates for the defensive category, I guess you could call it. So just the 1 swords and the 2 level limit area B. I think both of these cards are really strong in the deck. Swords especially, I think, is very underrated and could definitely be played in a lot more Decklist format, given how aggressive it is. Swords also has really great interaction with Giant Trunade, where I can basically keep it alive for 5 turns, which is basically equal to one of the jars, because it allows me to see 5 new cards, which is really strong. Level limit is also insane because a lot of your guys are really small, so they can attack under level limit. And in combination with a Jama Trio, if I get my opponent with 2 level 4 hires and then I activate a Jama Trio, then suddenly they're completely locked, so also really strong. However, I didn't want to play any more floodgates than these 3 because I only like to have 1 up at a time, just because obviously it's really vulnerable to mass back row removal at that stage. This brings us straight into the 3 threatening roars, which I like for the opposite reason to the floodgates, which is that they're chainable. Quite often, once I start to get really heavy control of the game, I like having, 1 floodgate up or recruiter up, and then also having a threatening roar down, just for that extra safety. If my opponent tries to go for a big push, then I just have that safety of knowing that they can't really do anything about it. Also, as I mentioned, the jars are most powerful when you activate them on your turn. So if you have a threatening roar and you can stop your opponent from attacking into them and activating them on their turn, then it's obviously much better to do it that way. On a similar note, we have the 1 Desert Sunlight. I think this works very nicely as well with the jars, but also the Nimble Momongas in the early game if you just want to protect from a Nobleman of Crossart or a Mystic Swordsman level 2. This was actually a suggestion by Jinzo to add in just the 1. I didn't consider just playing the 1 before, but I'm really liking it so far. It just, like I said, again, the jars are your win condition, pseudo win condition. So having one more card to allow them to resolve, even though I say it's much better for them to resolve in your turn, you'd rather have them resolve on your opponent's turn than not at all. Moving on to what I think is the most interesting part of the deck, which is the removal aspect. I think a lot of burn decks kind of neglect this area of just normal deck building, which is to counter what your opponent is playing, because they're too busy focused on achieving their own win condition, which is just, burning. So with this in mind, obviously, we're playing the two Pandas, which can be nice big attackers. I've already talked about them, and the one Cyberjar, which I've talked a lot about how powerful it is already. But now getting on to some of the weirder stuff, we have the one Lava Golem. Now this is a card that definitely looks a bit odd in the deck. Normally you would see like a whole Lava Golem strategy with like Nightmare Wheels and I don't know what else, but I actually really just like playing the one. So the reason is that firstly he contribute 2 and it's as cost, so you can't even judgment it, so it's just straight removal, very powerful removal. Secondly is that he does the 1000 burn damage, so towards the end of the game that definitely can add up and be very scary. Also, since you're playing a Jama trio, your opponent is most likely going to have 2 monsters on their side, so it's very hard for them to play around, and it makes Golem live much more often. And since you're playing a lot of defensive cards, you're not too worried about him being used to attack into you. In fact, it can be quite funny sometimes if you have a magical cylinder and end up doing 3000 damage to your opponent, so that can end up working out really well for you. Then we have Tribe, which I think is a very underrated card in Burn for a couple reasons. The first is that he can be used to pop Ojama Trio tokens, which can't be booked, and then that does an instant 900 damage to your opponent. So that's really strong towards the late game. And as I talked about earlier, being able to attack in a Burn deck is incredibly powerful because it's free damage on top of all the effect damage that you're planning on doing. So Tribe is really strong in the sense that it's able to remove a monster and then attack afterwards. And then the Exiled Force we've kind of already talked about. It's searchable off Rat, it's just a clean 1-for-1, so I like the variance of Lava Golem tributing 2 for cost, Tribe killing face-ups, and then Exiled killing 1-for-1. So it gives you a lot of variety and it allows you to play around a lot of tough situations. And then we also play the one Prem, which allows us to reuse the 3 of these monsters, because my opponent will often try to get rid of the Lava Golem to avoid taking any burn, but then since it's been summoned properly, I can summon it back, and now I have a 3000 attack beta, and then obviously Tribe and Exiles are just good to revive at any time. And then getting on to what I think is the weirdest part about this deck, which is the heavy amount of back row removal that I play. I think this is very unexpected in Burn, and it's probably the aspect that catches my opponent off the most. You'd probably maybe expect to see these more in like a Rescue Cat version. I think one of the commentators on stream actually got my deck confused and thought I was playing the Rescue Cat version after he saw the Giant Trunade. So it catches a lot of people off guard, and as I mentioned earlier, I really wanted to make the most out of the heavy usage of Judgment in the current format. And if you think about it, the cards that are most likely to bait the Judgment are Heavy Storm and Giant Trunade, so they're very powerful in that sense. Also, by getting rid of back row, it allows me free room to attack, which, as I've already mentioned, is really powerful. And finally, it allows me to safely go for game without worrying about any back row interruptions. So for example, say I've got a few burn cards in my hand, and then I can activate Giant Trunade, set them knowing that I have enough damage for next turn, and knowing that I'm not going to get caught out by an end phase, Dust Tornado, or Raigeki Break, or anything like that that could possibly interrupt the amount of damage that I've planned to do. With the side deck, there's quite a bit that I'm undecided on, but I will start with the cards that I have really been enjoying. Firstly is the 3 Des Wombat. I think a lot of burn players don't respect the mirror. Obviously, you can't play Decree, but you can play Des100, and I normally side that in straight for Nimble Mamanga, since I'm not expecting to get attacked, and if I am getting attacked, it's with Panda, so Nimble isn't going to say help me there. And this really is going to show. I'm going to go through a few replays after this, and my first match in the tournament was against Burn, and I'll just say it right now, I would not have won that match if it wasn't for Des100. Secondly, we have the two mind controls. These used to be in the main deck actually when Chaos Turbo was the top deck. Obviously it's just great for stealing flip effects and getting their effects and handing them back a useless monster, which helps fuel your burn cards and lock them out of the game. And finally, I have the two anti-spell fragments. This is definitely a very uncommon card to see in any deck really. So the reason I play this is that because my hardest matchup by far is Reasoning Gate Turbo. As I mentioned, Burn in general struggles with aggression, and that is the most aggressive deck in the format. So anti-spell fragments is just really strong at slowing it down. I think the main thing is that they can't activate True Nade to get rid of interruptions in the same turn, so that's really strong. I know I already play Threatening Roar in the main, but you really need that much for that matchup because it's really tough. The bonus about playing Anti-Spell Fragrance is that it also helps you against Empty Jar and Library FDK, so also covering yourself there. Again, I think it's really important to respect alt-win strategies, otherwise you only have yourself to blame if you just don't play any outs to those strategies. Moving on to some of the cards that I'm a bit more undecided on. Firstly, two suggestions from Jinzo were to add the Cypher Soldier and the Injection Fairy Lily. Now, I certainly see the potential for both of these cards, but I'm going to take you through a bit of like why I'm undecided on these cards. So Cypher Soldier, my biggest fear was that in the warrior matchup, obviously if we're summoning an attack, I'm not only going to be attacking against warriors. They play quite a heavy spellcaster lineup with the 3 Kaiku, 1 Skilled Dark and 1 Breaker, and on top of that they also play like Tribe, so it's quite a few answers to a face-up Cypher Soldier, and if you set it, it's obviously vulnerable to Nobleman and Mystic Swordsman level 2. Now, the theory we had going into the game was that since we're playing Desert Sunlight and Ceasefire, it gives us quite a few outs to any set removal, so it makes it a lot safer to set. With Injection Fairy Lily, on the other hand, I definitely see the potential in this card. Just being able to attack for a bunch of damage is super strong. The downside is obviously the 2000 burn that you take on your end, and when you're attacking over a monster that say has like 1800 attack, you're only going to be doing 1600 damage, so you're going to be doing less damage to your opponent than you take yourself. Then next turn, if your opponent summons something else that attacks into the Lily, then you have to decide again, am I going to take another 2000, or am I just going to let this card die and take some other damage? So before you know it, you can actually burn yourself for about 4000 damage, which is pretty tough. Scapegoat is a card that I have just been experimenting with in general. Obviously it's great for just chub blocking, and if my opponent is playing cards like Jinzo or Decree, it's nice to have another spell option to help stop attacks. Obviously I prefer Threatening Roar because it can stop my opponents from attacking my jars specifically, which as I've mentioned is really strong. But yeah, just experimenting with Scapegoat in general, and then the other 3 one-ups there are just like, yeah, pretty random. I'm not even going to go over them. Now, to show how all this theory works in practice, I'm going to go through 2 plays from rounds 1 and 2 that I particularly liked from the tournament. So starting off with round 1, we have the burn mirror that I was mentioning earlier. To set the scene, we're now in game 2. I got completely bodied in game 1. My opponent managed to see more burn cards before me, and to be completely honest, I was quite nervous with this being my first tournament, and I think I made a few suboptimal plays that could have maybe saved me the game, but I think it was definitely my opponent's game. So onto game 2, we find ourselves towards the end when both of us are on quite low life. All the damage that I've done to my opponent so far has been with poking with Dale100. Again, just showing how good it is to attack with burn. So I haven't even seen a single burn card up till this point, which happens sometimes, and you need to be ready for that. My opponent, on the other hand, has managed to do quite a bit of damage to me because he managed to get skill drain up, negating the Dale100, and getting in for a bunch of damage with desserts and barrel. At this point in the game now, I have a Cyber Jar set, which I know once it activates will destroy the 3 trio tokens on my side of the field, putting me down to 100, so I know that I have to be really careful when I go for my game shot, knowing that when I do activate the Cyber Jar, I can, potentially get a bunch of burn cards allowing me to finish off the game, but at the same time, it's going to destroy the Decklist, leaving me vulnerable to potential burn cards that my opponent has drawn in the following turns. Since I'm feeling quite safe just leaving the Decklist face up on the field and with a sort of revealing light so that they can't attack into the jar just in case, I just sit here for a few turns in the hopes that I see either a giant Trunade or a heavy storm in the next 3 turns, and on the 3rd turn I actually get rewarded and I do see the Trunade. At this stage I can make my play and go for the game shot. I activate the Trunade, putting all the spells and traps back to the hand and allowing me to safely activate Cyber Jar, which puts me down to 100, but I don't have to worry about my opponent chaining any burn cards. At this point there are 25 cards left in my deck, and all I really need to see is like any burn card. On top of that, I do have the Giant Rat in my hand, which can attack for another 14, so I only have to do 800 damage, which is not too much to ask for. And as we see the jar resolve, I managed to see the burn cards that I need and my opponent concedes. On to the 2nd round, where we once again find ourselves in game 2. Game 1 was a complete blowout again, this time for me. I just drew the nuts, pot graceful, bunch of burn cards within a few turns. I had enough to just go for a complete OTK. As you can see up there in the side, I was doing all the math, 2000 plus 2200, etc. And right now we're in quite a bit of a tough situation. Our opponent has Tribe and Sangan, and both of these monsters are quite tough for me to deal with. Sangan, being a level 3, can attack underlevel them in area B, and just getting in for 1000 each turn really adds up, and it's quite tough. On the other hand, Tribe can just get rid of anything that we use to try to defend. It can get rid of trio tokens if I try to use that eventually. So I need to deal with both of these monsters. I deal with them temporarily by using Threatening Roar, but obviously that's only going to stop their attacks for 1 turn. So I try to go for a little bit of an unconventional play, which is to tribute over Tribe and Sangan. Obviously tributing Sangan seems like a horrible idea since they're getting a card, but remember, we don't really care about card advantage, and our opponent adds Sinister, which doesn't mean anything. It's really an empty card. If anything, I would have preferred they added Sinister than if they added nothing at all. My opponent then summons Tsukiyomi on their turn to set the Lava Golem, which is a temporary out, and it really shows that they don't have any back row removal, so I'm feeling quite safe. I draw into a Nimble Mumanga, which really starts to solidify my game state, because now I've got 1 monster, 1 spell, and 1 trap to act as the defenses. And so I'm feeling like very solid here. I can just wait it out and wait for the right moment to start pushing for game. It's at this point that my opponent makes a very desperate play and actually decides to creature swap the Nimble Mumanga for Lava Golem. Now, this is an odd one, because if you expect Burn to not be playing back row removal, it's very possible that, and also like I might not be playing something like Book, which I don't play,
So it's actually pretty reasonable to expect that I don't even have an out to my own level limit area B, in which case I would end up burning myself to death with the lava golem. But what my opponent doesn't count on is that I am playing Giant Trunade, which, like a classic anime duelist, I have managed to draw the very next turn. And once again, we're going to see the power of Giant Trunade. So now I activate the Trunade and send all the spells and traps back to hand. My opponent chains Book to set their Momonga, playing around Snatch Steal, but that doesn't really matter here. I do have the Mind Control, so I do have the option of taking the Momonga, but since I have Panda, I simply summon that to pierce through the Momonga and get the 2 extra out of my deck onto my side of the field, and then at this stage Lava Golem is free to attack in for an additional 3000 damage, which is huge for us. On the following turn, my opponent makes another good attempt at trying to lock me with the Lava Golem by summoning Tur and taking my Panda instead. However, at this stage of the game, I have a trio and a dessert, so I'm really just waiting for him to summon that Tsukiyomi so I can get in for 2-5, and then it's just a matter of doing a last 300 damage, which I'm able to do a few turns later when I draw the Tribe Infecting Virus, and as I mentioned during the deck list, I can simply summon him and then target the beasts to pop, which can't be booked or anything like that, so then that gets me the game. And yeah, that really brings us to the end of everything that I have to say about this deck and my experience with the tournament. If you would like to see other replays, you can catch my round 4 replay against Alvarado in the GOAT format stream. Otherwise, you're welcome to DM me on Dueling Book and I'll happily send you through some of my replays if you're looking at improving on the strategy. Besides all the theory and ideas that have gone into the deck, I would say that, you know, the most important aspect is to really have a good knowledge of the game, and especially how chain links work, because that is the most important aspect when it comes to this deck. You have to know when it's safe to activate your burn cards, in what order, and do you want it in separate chain links or do you want it in one big one? All of that stuff is really important and will make the difference between winning and losing. For me personally, I feel like I've given burn a good run and it's time for me to experiment with something new. I look forward to hopefully proving that I'm not a one-trick pony that can only top with burn, so definitely looking forward to that in the future. As a side note, I've really enjoyed making this video and I'm actually considering making my own channel, so I'm gonna post this video on a channel, and if you'd like to see more content like this, then show some love and I will be up with a new video soon once I decide what I'm going to be playing for the foreseeable future. Finally, I just want to say thank you again to Jinzo for hosting this video, to goatformat.com and Dale for hosting the tournament. I really enjoyed it, and that's all from me, so ATJ out.